Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And consistent with our personal relationship, I agree with virtually everything you said. I have no bones to pick in anything you described, and I'm happy to see our mutual friend, Assistant Secretary Crittenbrink, here as well. We have had the chance to meet and speak a number of times. Some weeks ago, I asked Taiwan's representative to the United States what was the single most important thing we could do to convince China that it would be unwise to consider a military action of invasion against Taiwan. And the representative said it would be to provide funding support for Ukraine. And like the chairman has indicated, I am very pleased that we finally got that done. I think it sends a signal to would-be aggressors around the world of all kinds that we will stand by our commitments and that we honor and respect the rights of democratic people to retain their freedoms and their vision for their own livelihoods. Unfortunately, we know that Xi Jinping has stated an intention to unify with Taiwan, potentially including a forceful measure. And we see a number of troubling developments that we have to take into account. Of course, he's building out extraordinary military capabilities, naval, space, rocketry, and other dimensions. He is exerting economic coercion on Taiwan, obviously making numerous threatening overflights, extending gray zone activities, particularly thinking about some of the disinformation that was shared through TikTok during the most recent presidential elections. I can tell you that from my reading, that hasn't had the impact that China may have hoped for. But clearly, Taiwan and its ability to retain its freedom is of great interest to us and to other nations around the world. It is our hope that Taiwan can be an aggressive competitor with China and with other nations, even with us, but not to be conquered by China. And one of the reasons that we are so anxious to help them invest in their own military might, as well as the reason we invest in our military might, is to assure that there's not temptation on the part of any nation, particularly China, to take aggressive military action against our friends in Taiwan. Like the chairman, I'm happy that we're celebrating the Taiwan Relations Act. It's not as clear-cut as perhaps some would like, but I think it's good news that we found that this year the U.S. will surpass China as Taiwan's top export market. Taiwan's collaboration with semiconductor manufacturers here in the U.S. to help build a resilient semiconductor industry here in the U.S. is also of great note and great importance to us. And I hope that the people of Taiwan recognize that we are their friends, that we are anxious for them to be able to determine their own course and to chart their lives as they wish, and that we will in all ways honor our friendship and our commitment to one another. And so I look today to get a sense of what you believe, Mr. Assistant Secretary, China's strategy is with regards to Taiwan, and what ours should be, and what it is, and what things we hope to do, everything from economic strategy, military strategy, diplomatic strategy, and how things are developing on both fronts, both China's success and our own. With that, Mr. Chairman, we'll turn the microphone back to you, and we can turn to hear from the Assistant Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Assistant Secretary, it's, I think, apparent to everyone that China goes to great lengths to try and convince other countries to sever diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Why, in your view, do they do that? What's the intent? What's the purpose? What objective are they trying to reach?
Well, Mr. Ranking Member, very candidly speaking, I think their objective is to try to pressure and coerce, intimidate, and isolate Taiwan. And I think they believe that by picking off, so to speak, Taiwan's diplomatic allies, they can further those objectives. In response to that, we do a number of things. We do support Taiwan and its relationship with its remaining diplomatic partners, and we can talk a bit more about that if you like. But we also think it's just as important to assist Taiwan in having productive relationships with its unofficial partners, including the United States.
There have been a number of countries over the years that have severed relations with Taiwan. Some in the Pacific, in Latin America as well.
Yes, sir.
Are there any that have gone the other way? Meaning nations that did not have relations with Taiwan, but have now established those relationships.
I don't have those names at my fingertips, but I know some of the countries, including in the Pacific, have flip-flopped over the years. And it's one of the things, Mr. Ranking Member, that we tried to caution countries, tried to caution them about getting caught up in this, this larger game, so to speak. We've also cautioned countries that many times the promises that the PRC makes when it's trying to convince a country to flip, many times China does not carry out those promises. And also, we also try to highlight Taiwan is a very capable and valuable partner for countries to have.
Yeah, my assessment is that there have been nations that have severed relations with Taiwan but haven't gone the other way. It would seem that they're succeeding in that effort, and we're probably not being quite as effective. Am I wrong in that assessment?
Well, I think it's a fact, Mr. Ranking Member, that over time, the number of Taiwan's formal diplomatic partners has decreased.
Yeah.
That's a fact.
Yeah.
But one thing that we've underscored to our Taiwan partners as well, as important as those diplomatic relations are, I'll just reiterate the point I made a moment ago, many of Taiwan's unofficial partners, including the United States, are at least as important as those former those formal diplomatic allies. And I've been gratified that even just over the last 3 years, we've seen a pretty significant increase in the number of countries who are willing to stand up and say that they recognize peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait is a matter of international concern. It's fundamentally important that they too oppose unilateral changes to change the status quo, and that they too are increasing their interactions with Taiwan, which we fully support.
Yeah, I would anticipate that if we were to look at what China's strategy is with regards to Taiwan, that one small element would be trying to isolate Taiwan diplomatically. This is not a major, perhaps, thrust of their strategy vis-a-vis Taiwan, but part of it. And the fact that they've been successful in doing that gives me some concern that we don't have a strategy as effective as theirs in moving things in the other direction. And having more nations establish relations with Taiwan and insisting on them being involved in international bodies and so forth, so as to increase the ties that Taiwan would enjoy globally, and also make it more likely that were China to be tempted to carry out some kind of military effort, that they'd recognize the number of nations that would find that offensive and would be likely to respond in an aggressive way, not necessarily militarily, but economically or diplomatically. So I would think it would be an important part of our nation's strategy vis-a-vis Taiwan. Can you give me a sense, what are the key parameters, do you believe, of what China is doing to try and pull Taiwan into its orbit? Or ultimately, as Xi Jinping has indicated, to actually create a single nation with Taiwan as part of the PRC?
Well, Mr. Ranking Member, I do think that the diplomatic piece is just one element of that strategy. I think I would tend to agree with you. It's not the most important part, but it is an element. And in response to that, as I mentioned, we try to be active in messaging countries and warning and cautioning them about what they may be getting themselves into, but also in a more proactive and affirmative way. We've partnered with Taiwan and other countries around the world to see that Taiwan's remaining diplomatic partners receive tangible benefits for that partnership and understand its value. In terms of this, the broader Chinese strategy, again, I'll reiterate what I said at the top. I think that, China's stated objective is to unify with Taiwan. President Xi Jinping has stated that the so-called Great Rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is incomplete without reunifying the so-called motherland. So that statement is out there. China also.
That's the objective.
That's their objective.
And one small element of the strategy, as we've indicated, is diplomatic isolation.
Right.
But what are the other dimensions, do you think, of that key strategy?
I think it's clear that they're building other means to try to coerce and intimidate Taiwan, including their military capabilities, the exercise of those capabilities, their attempts to, as the chairman pointed out, to undermine longstanding norms like the center line. And I think if they were successful, they would like to, through disinformation and these other intimidation tactics and gray zone tactics, they would like to discourage the people of Taiwan into somehow thinking, right, that unification is inevitable. I think that's as candid as I can be about how we see their strategy. Our strategies I've tried to lay out is on the opposite side of that. We stand for peace, stability,
I'll come back for that. My time is up, so I'll come back
Yes,
for
sir.
that, and I want to just elaborate more on theirs and then come back to ours.
Yes, sir.
Good, thank you. We were speaking about some of the tactics or tools that China uses in their strategy vis-a-vis Taiwan, and I would have thought that that their relationship with major powers in their region would be high on their priority list, that they'd want to see a weakening relationship, for instance, between the United States and places like South Korea, Japan, Australia, the Philippines, but it's been the opposite. They've done a number of things which have weakened, from my perspective, their ties with those nations. We've seen one of the great accomplishments diplomatically is seeing Japan and South Korea be able to come together in some important respects. Why have they failed so badly in terms of, I mean, I'd add India to that list. That's not quite the same neighborhood, but the next door. Just one after the other, they seem to have done pretty well with some of the islands in the Pacific and perhaps in Latin America, but they seem to have gone backwards with some of the major powers that are in their neighborhood. I'm sure part of that is our good work, but part has to be some of the stumbles on their part. Have I mischaracterized that, and why do you believe that might be?
No, Mr. Ranking Member, I think you've characterized it quite accurately. Maybe I'll leave to other observers to explain exactly why this has happened, but I guess I would make a couple of points. We're incredibly proud of our approach to the broader Indo-Pacific region. I would argue that our relationship with friends, partners, and allies across the region are stronger than they've ever been before. And also, increasingly, we've been able to network those relationships into what we call, a lattice work of overlapping relationships. It's the bilateral partnerships, it's the trilateral work with Tokyo and Seoul, with Tokyo and Manila, with Canberra. It's the Quad, it's AUKUS, it's other partnerships. And what we find, Mr. Ranking Member, I mean, the Chinese would complain that somehow this is a containment strategy. It absolutely is not. What we find is we are promoting our affirmative agenda, the things that we stand for: peace and stability, international law, the fact that all countries, large and small, ought to follow and play by the same rules. Large countries shouldn't bully the weak. And what we find is that is a vision that is very popular in the region. Countries around the region, they don't like to be intimidated, they don't like to be bullied, they don't like to be coerced. And I hope that that makes clear perhaps why China has not succeeded in certain areas and where we believe we have. And furthermore, I'd say, Mr. Ranking Member, we always talk about the three pillars of our China strategy: invest, align, compete. I would argue probably the align piece with allies and partners is probably the most important and the most effective.
I, for one, was surprised to see their treatment of Australia, for instance, and wondered how that could possibly be in their interest to offend a nation in their region as they did. Obviously, a nation with which we have a close relationship, but a number of actions they've taken, including the way they've treated the people in Hong Kong, have obviously had an impact in their neighborhood. One dimension of their strategy has to be economic with regards to Taiwan. What are they doing on the economic front? And is it alarming Taiwan? Are they building closer relations with Taiwan, particularly in the area of semiconductors or others? Are there? I mean, they've made a massive investment. We're talking about right now our CHIPS Act and what we're finally doing, but China's been basically has had a CHIPS Act in place for almost a decade, spending over $50 billion to establish a competitive semiconductor capacity, which has not yet yielded the result they'd looked for. What is China doing on the economic front to try and either grow ties with Taiwan or to isolate it economically?
Well, more broadly, Mr. Ranking Member, I agree that they've stated explicitly through made in China strategies and other documents that they would like to dominate the key sectors, especially the high-tech sectors of the 21st century economy. So I think that's their broader goal. When it comes to Taiwan, I think it's been a complex approach and somewhat of a mixed message. I think on the one hand, the economic ties between Taiwan and the mainland actually remain quite robust. But I think that, like many partners around the region, around the world, Taiwan has been working to diversify those economic relationships so that they're not as subject to the temptation of coercion, the risk of coercion and intimidation. But here too, I think China has used the coercive tool as well. They took some steps in the run-up to the election to curtail some of the economic and trade relationships. There were certain instances where it seemed they were picking sectors that they hoped would have the most positive impact politically in Taiwan from their perspective, and they've also threatened to curtail some of the previous trade agreements with Taiwan. So I think it's a mixed picture. It's partly engagement, and it's partly threatening consequences for not doing Beijing's bidding in certain areas.
Thank you. I appreciate the fact that you've given me a heads up on this already today privately, that we're going to make progress on the demonstration of the U.S. strategy vis-a-vis China. And again, its intent is to not confront, but to help China be dissuaded from a dangerous course and instead be a competitor on the global stage, not an enemy. But as you know, the former chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and myself developed legislation, had it passed, that calls upon the State Department to provide to Congress an outline of our China strategy, and some of that would be for Congress as a whole and in public. Some would probably be classified. You've indicated we're about to get that. Is that right?
Yes, Senator. I was informed that, again, consistent with Section 6511 of the FY22 NDAA, the administration has made available for in-camera review the administration's China strategy. My understanding is we are in touch with your team to arrange an opportunity for you to review the strategy at your convenience. We're grateful for your leadership and support on this issue, and I think as an entire whole of government, we look forward to continuing to partner with you on our strategy vis-a-vis the PRC.
I would note that the law that was passed called for this to be presented to Congress, some in public and then some classified, as opposed to just an in-camera review. So I would expect that the State Department would follow the law as opposed to a different course. Separately, it is the impression of a number of people, and I don't know whether it's accurate or not, but I've been interested in your sense, that if you go around Africa, everywhere you turn, there's China. If you go around Latin America, there's China. If you go even in the Caribbean, there's China. That they're everywhere. Part of that is Belt and Road. Part of it has been to secure the raw materials for the economy of the future. And they seem to have done that as we've been asleep at the switch. Is that a fair assessment that they really are in prominent positions? And I know it's through loans, and we take great pride in saying some people are unhappy that there are loans, but nonetheless, China has when you get a loan from the bank, you nonetheless have a relationship with the banker. When they're getting a loan from China, they have a relationship with China. Have they made inroads in Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and are we woefully behind in those areas?
Well, the first part of your statement, does China have a global presence in many of these regions? Absolutely, especially economically. Are we woefully behind? No, I would absolutely say we are not. I would say, Mr. Ranking Member, again, our approach, whether it's in the Indo-Pacific or Africa or Latin America or elsewhere, we're focused first and foremost on what we stand for, our affirmative strategy in each of these regions. We always tell our partners, we're not asking them to choose between the United States and China, and partners tell us they don't want to choose. But what they do want is they want to make sure they can make their own decisions free from coercion. They can protect their sovereignty. They can have the final say over matters that are important to their security and prosperity, and that's what we stand for. So I remain confident in our standing in these regions and what we offer. We do have to offer something, and partners around the world oftentimes say that that's what they most look for from the United States and for others, from others, is an offer. But again, our fundamental focus is on what we stand for. Now, there are instances, as we've talked about here today, Mr. Ranking Member, where there are some downsides to interaction with the PRC in many cases, and we try to be clear with countries to be careful to ensure that they're not making themselves vulnerable to coercion. We also try to make sure that partners understand what they're getting into regarding a project. What's the long-term potential implication for a country's sovereignty of engaging in one of these projects, especially if it involves a huge debt burden? What are the labor or the environmental or other implications of some of these projects? That's what we try to stand for, and then we try to stand for what we and our partners offer. So I'm confident in that. But does China have a presence in many regions around the world? Absolutely.
I would say, based on my own limited travels, but also in sounding the opinion of diplomats here and others, that China has established a much stronger presence in those nations than they had just a few years ago, and in many cases eclipsing our own. I would note that we spent billions of dollars, if you will, helping people with charitable endeavors, development opportunities, showing them what we stand for. China tends to do what's in their self-interest, and establishing mines and rail lines and ports that will strengthen their economy, strengthen their position on the global stage. I think we need to go from just doing things that are humanitarian and showing what we stand for, to instead doing things that are actually in our best interest and promote our national security and the strength of our own economy, and that we're pretending like we're in a world where we don't have a competitor, and we do. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn back to you, sir.
Mr. Ranking Member, could I make just one comment on that? I mean, I'm most familiar with the East Asia Pacific region, obviously, for which my team and I are responsible. But I would say, with the support and leadership of Congress, we've been given the tools, I think, to compete in the ways that you're talking about. And certainly in Asia, partners say all the time, we don't want to choose. We have important, trading relationships with China, like most of us do. But every country in the region that I talk to says they don't want to be pushed around. They don't want to be coerced. They want to have options. They want to have balance in their approach. And I think our being able to make an offer, hopefully a better offer to partners, is really the key. And I think especially on the economic side and the infrastructure side, that's where I think the Development Finance Corporation, the tools, the authorities, the finances that Congress has provided have been really transformational. Increased support for our economic assistance programs across the region, in addition to all the other tools that we bring on the security front, the people front, health, development, and the like. But I do agree with you. I certainly feel like in the Indo-Pacific, we've been quite successful. I think partners have noticed.
And I'm thinking about the Development Finance Corp, and I know it's designed to deal with the development needs of poor countries and other countries that have humanitarian crises and so forth. But I would note China invests in things that are going to help China down the road. They try and do good in many respects, but more importantly, they try and do what's in China's interest, and would suggest that we do the same with the DFC. Thank you.